Hello, I'm Derek Arden, and welcome to Monday Night Live. Live and uncut interviews with some thought leaders from all around the world. Tonight, I'm delighted to have Jenny de San George with me, all the way from California. I first met Jenny in Phoenix, Arizona, when I was attending the National Speakers Convention, which is the American speaking convention, really the world speaking convention. Jenny, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Can you just give us a quick snapshot of what you've done for the last few years?
Let me see if I understand that correctly. You've just asked a professional speaker to be focused and sum up their life in 4 or 5 sentences.
Exactly,
Uh,
that's why I asked you. Exactly.
yeah, I got the message. Oh dear, where would one start? I ended up by being a professional speaker. That in itself may or may not be relevant to today. It all had to do with risk taking. I made the mistake of marrying into dentistry. And knowing nothing about dentistry, my then husband on day one said, "Why don't you answer the phone, dear, till I find somebody who actually knows what they're doing?" Um, and that changed my whole life, because when you own half a business and you don't know anything about the business, you have to learn very quickly. I moved from London to New York for a year, and thought before I went back to London, I'd just pop over to San Francisco and see some relatives I'd never met, and met Edmund, who was from Paris, going to dental school in San Francisco. Sort of the rest became history.
Fantastic. And the thing that really intrigued me from our chats is that you call yourself a recovering perfectionist, and of helping yourself avoid procrastination. Now, I think a lot of us that work for ourselves and don't have someone pushing the buttons behind us suffer from that. So, how do you deal with it?
Well, I talk about this in my seminars all the time, and I speak to two audiences, two different markets. I love working and coaching professional speakers because I've been doing it so long. And I also, on a global basis, teach dentists how to run a successful practice. And the majority of dentists are left brain. They are perfectionists, which makes them such wonderful dentists. But being married to a perfectionist, and Emma was also a perfectionist, you want stress, and that's a perfectionist being married to a perfectionist.
Mm.
Perfectionists are very hard to live with. They're very hard to work for. We are not, and I've had to train myself completely, we tend to be seen as negative rather than positive. If somebody years ago would give me a 15-page document and there was one typo, I guarantee within a millisecond I would see that one typo. Because the mistakes, and I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads here, and the mistake would just jump out. So the old Jenny would say to my staff, because at one point I had 7 internal staff looking after my speaking and product company. My first reaction was, "Oh, Susie, there's a typo on page 9." And then Jenny had to learn to say, "Thanks for doing such a great job. It all looks perfect, but could you take care of the typo on page 9?" So as a perfectionist, we're seen as negative. We don't mean to be. It's just that when it's out of balance, it jumps out at us. And people say to me, "What is a recovering perfectionist?" And to me, the only difference between me, a recovering perfectionist, and maybe other people is that at least I recognize I have a fault, and people who don't recognize it are either in denial, or if they don't recognize it, really don't know how to work on it. I will say, Derek, that I did Google some years ago, and I really need to get it up to date. But the American Medical Association has listed perfectionism and procrastination as one of the biggest stresses in our lives. They're not saying it's a disease, but perfectionism and procrastination causes stress. It causes high blood pressure, which I suppose can cause some heart problems. So it's something that needs to be acknowledged.
That's really interesting, actually. And so, actually, taking action, just doing it, is better than sitting on it and worrying about it with this huge list. I had somebody on earlier this year who talked about, I don't like making lists because looking at the list stresses me out.
You have actually, if I want a cheap laugh with an audience, I will say, there are those of you in this room who don't think you are perfectionists, but let me tell you what a perfectionist is. You make a list for the day, And then you do something that wasn't on the list. And you know what we do? We write it on the list so we can have the satisfaction of ticking it off that we've done it. I mean, that's perfectionism, on steroids. I will say, if this would be of help to anybody, I have really learned how to stop the procrastination. Because to Derek's point, when you keep putting something off and you keep putting something off, the stress and the guilt, you wake up in the morning, and there are stories of people who write books, and we've got Damien. We talk about people who, before they sit down to write the next chapter, they vacuum the carpet, or they clean the windows. They just want everything perfect around them. So when they sit down, they are not distracted by anything. And at the end of the day, they've got rid of all the distractions, but we've not actually tackled the elephant in the room. And when we do tackle it, Derek, and we finally finish it, I will guarantee we say to ourselves, well, that wasn't so bad. I sort of enjoyed that. Why didn't I do it before? The not doing it is more stressful than the doing.
Isn't that interesting? In fact, until I sent my newsletter out on a Monday morning, and I do that now since we have the Monday Night Live show, I was always procrastinating and sending it out about 2 weeks later than I was doing it. So it's really interesting what you say there, and there's a few people nodding and putting things in the chat box.
Jill is smiling from ear to ear, so I don't know whether she's relating. I would like to share how I've really conquered it. Please. And I know this word is so overused, but I'm going to talk about visualization, or whatever you want to call it for yourself. When I wake up in the morning, I tend to lie in bed for 10 or 15 minutes and plan my day, particularly if I have to do something. If I have to write a 2,000-word article and I have to do it today, and I keep putting it off, when I lay in bed, I start writing the article in my mind. And as I get up and I go to the bathroom and I brush my teeth, I'm still writing the article in my mind. I then find that I actually don't even stop at the kitchen. I go straight to the computer, sit down, and continue what I have already started lying in bed. And it works. I mean, 2 hours later, I may still be in my nightdress and my slippers or dressing gown, but I've done it. If I delay it and keep thinking, well, I'll start it at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock, I will end up by procrastinating.
That sounds brilliant. I personally, when I'm in alpha state, and I think that's what the psychologists call that, when you're just waking up and you get all those creative ideas, I need a pencil and a piece of paper, and then I start mind mapping. Otherwise, I'm worried that I'll forget it.
I never go anywhere. By my bed, wherever I am, I always have a pen and a piece of paper. I know some people will put it on their mobile, but I tend to be a visual person, so I need to write it down so my brain takes that picture.
Brilliant. Now, you talked about being the secretary for your husband and answering the phone. I can't imagine you being a secretary for anybody, knowing you, Jenny, but you said there were a number of hurdles to overcome becoming an entrepreneur, and you said you've been an entrepreneur for 40 years. What were those hurdles?
Well, when I moved to New York City, I worked 1 year for J. Walter Thompson, who at that time was the largest advertising agency in the world. I think they're most probably still way up there. And then I came to San Francisco and I worked for Lomas and Nettleton, which was at that time the oldest mortgage company in the world. And I noticed I was just too independent to fit into the corporate structure. That would be the nicest way of saying it. Yeah. When I was hired in San Francisco, I negotiated my hours, and you can't do that, but they wanted me and they were kind enough to do it. But I didn't have any choice, because when you marry and you take out the bank loan, I just found myself, as I say, at the front desk, and the Lancashire-Mies did not take it kindly to be told that obviously I was so dumb I was only good to answer the phone for a couple of weeks till he found somebody who knew what they were doing. And so it just became a challenge. And here I am flying around the world telling everybody how to run their dental practice. And I've never worked in any other practice but the one I helped create. So I have no other experience, so I can tell you what all their mistakes are. So yes, I'm just an independent kind of person, but I was sent to boarding school when I was 6. So the seed was sown very early.
So you said Lancashire. Come on, and whereabouts in Lancashire was that then? We're all curious about that.
Bolton,
Bolton. Wow.
Bolton Wanderers.
Yeah, I've spoken at the Bolton Wanderers Stadium actually when they were in the Premiership. I think they're in the third division now.
I think they're up in the top, aren't they?
No, they're not. I think they're either in I think they're in the first division, which is really the third division. But never mind that. So you were like a lot of speakers I've met. You weren't good at the politics, about the big corporate politics. You spoke your mind when perhaps you shouldn't. Is that right?
I would say that today my brand is, and I actually enjoy telling my audiences this. Somebody will ask me a question from the audience, and I'll say, by now you have realized I have an opinion on absolutely everything, which I do. But I think that the speakers who are successful, or people who are successful, tend to have opinions.
Mm, no, absolutely. So dentists, I guess some people listening to this or watching this will be confused about how much help dentists needs. Now, I know the America's a very different market to the UK, and the UK is catching up with America, but what is it that you did for dentists?
Well, I've done a lot of speaking in the UK. I've been on the British Dental Association's annual convention at least 8 times, so I'm very knowledgeable. And most of the private dentists run an American type practice. The problem with dentists is that the vast majority of them simply want to do dentistry. And I have joked for years, the classic dentist would be happy if the patient would drop their teeth off in the morning at the front desk and come back at the end of the day and pick their teeth up. The dentist wants to work in dentistry. That's where their expertise is, and that's where they get their satisfaction. It's the person who's attached to the teeth that causes all the stress and the problems. And also the staff. I mean, dentists just want, like many entrepreneurial owners, they just wish the staff would turn up and do whatever it is they do and not bother the creator, because they just want to do their thing. But when you run a business, if you don't take care of the staff and the support structure, then we end up by sabotaging ourselves.
And is that what you do? You help them with managing the staff, with leadership, with motivation, with
Everything. Yeah,
right.
everything that's not clinical. And so I can go into, and I won't bore you with it, but I have got what I call is a 3-bucket system. And I can speak to any business in this world. Give me 60 minutes in a new business, and the Jenny concept stays the same. I just changed the buzzwords.
So what's the 3 buckets, Jenny?
The 3 buckets, basically. The first one, if you're in dentistry or healthcare, we talk about the patient. If you are dealing with the Hilton chain, you're talking about guests. If you're dealing with an airline, you're talking about the travelers. So the first one is who's buying the product. The second one is the team, how you hire, fire, and keep your team. And the third one is the business. And everything you do in a business is either focused on the buyer, or it's focused on the staff that's going to deliver whatever the product or service is. And then you've got to run your P&L and be profitable. So if I talk about staff, which I could do for 2 days, I can sum it up, Derek, in one phrase. Hire for longevity, manage for harmony, and sort out the stuff before it gets out of control. I'm still trying to find a neat one that I really want to use the S word, but I most probably shouldn't do that. And so you can go into any business in the world. You talk about hiring, you talk about managing, and you talk about addressing the issues. And most perfectionists don't like addressing issues. So when they see something, say with the staff, that isn't going the way they wish it would be, they just think, well, she's having an off day, it'll most probably be better tomorrow. And so it's that head in the sand approach. That part of procrastination can be very dangerous if one has a staff, or you're maybe working with a virtual assistant you've got some sort of support mechanism. If we don't follow up to make sure that our standards are met and we keep it inside, it will end up by really poisoning the relationship, and that's very sad.
And that's of course how stress happens, isn't it? Stress to both parties as well, actually. And then if you don't deal with it properly, suddenly they've got a claim against you, or goodness knows what. So go on, and how do you teach them to deal with that then? It's all very well saying that, but you've got this left brain introverted dentist that really wants to work on mouths, but you've got to coach them to look after Jenny or
Yes, and
in
I
reception.
live in Silicon Valley. So as I'm talking to you, my address is on Sand Hill Circle. And if I look out of my window, I'm inches away from 3000 Sand Hill Road, which most of you most probably know is the venture capital of the entire world. So I'm surrounded by left brain techie people. Luckily, I'm an ambivert, which means I'm 50% right brain, 50% left brain. And I think being an ambivert has some amazing
Mm.
and benefits is the word I was looking for, because I can see the big picture. So when I'm speaking to an audience, I can see the big picture. I can explain it to them. I can get them all excited. Yes, let's do it. And then my left brain says, and these are the 4 steps you need. And I break it down. So it's a nice combination of the 2 sides of the brain.
Mm. Because I've been told by Dr. Linda Shaw, who's been on this program, that I must never use left and right brain, which has been a great metaphor for me over the last 20 or 30 years. But, you know, of course, the neuroscientists want us to go into a lot more depth. I think it's a brilliant metaphor for, for leaders.
Derek, you asked me a question and I failed to answer it. And that was, how do you deal with left brain people or with the typical dentist?
Mm.
And you use the word leadership. I have many talents and I think I'm really good in certain things. What I'm not good at is teaching leadership. So I cover leadership when I deal with left brain people in one phrase: either provide it to your staff, either provide it or delegate it. If you ignore it, you are going to be a ship without a captain. So I would say very few people get excited about leadership. There's a ton of speakers, ton of books on leadership. It's really hard to do well consistently. So my answer to the entrepreneur is, if you have staff and you don't want to offer leadership, then delegate it. But to ignore it, you just have no sense of community and commitment within your group.
I think it's pretty difficult to delegate it in a small dentist practice, because the dentist is the boss, the leader, and certainly in this country is employing receptionists who aren't being paid very much. I'm not sure I see anyone in between.
Well, the problem, let's just talk about the small business. The problem with the small business owner, whether it's a dentist or anybody, is they're so busy doing their thing,
Yeah.
they're not available to monitor the staff. And so the staff continue doing what they think they're doing very well, but nobody ever gives them the feedback. And then suddenly that creator, that provider of services, looks up and says, how come this is all falling apart? Because they didn't take the time to let the staff know. And that's just a problem with staff delegation.
Sure. Now, you talked about honing mental ability. It's a huge issue, mental health at the moment. What did you mean by honing mental ability?
I don't think I meant it in the context that perhaps you're talking about it, Derek, from a wellness. I just thought it's getting control of my mind. I can get very scattered. I'm very creative. And I've got to be really careful that I don't start too many things or I'm multitasking. So to me, when I use the word mental, I have to mentally control my thoughts and discipline myself. So that's what I meant. I have no training or any permission to go down that road of health and wellness.
Okay, no, that's great. But it does bring me on to another point. I heard there's a lot of stress with dentists, a lot of stress. I don't know if
You
that's
keep
true.
going back to dentists, don't you? At one point, their suicide rate was 8 times the national average, and
Okay.
somebody told me the other day that that has changed. So I need to go in. But for years, we did. Let's get outside dentistry.
Okay. Okay, let's get outside dent. What about what about the mistakes that people make? The biggest mistakes that you see traveling the world that people make mistakes, and I guess they're quite common.
Well, one always has to be careful as the speaker when you have an audience. It doesn't matter what subject you're in or talking about, is that you must always be very kind to your audience, because they may be doing a lot of things incorrectly, but at least they turned up to try and better themselves. The people who really need continuing education, the people who don't actually come to the meetings, and so there's always that fine line of, trying to push your audience to do better, but remembering that they did get in the car, put money on the table, fly in, or whatever.
Mm.
So I woke up one day, and I made a comment about this at PSA. I woke up one day and found I had 14 books on time management, and I'd never taken the time to read them. It's this, you buy a book and it's by osmosis. I just hold the book and I'm going to suddenly be a good time management person. I can see Jill going like this. And you wake up one day and you think, I cannot buy the 15th book. This is ridiculous. So I did sit down, I flicked through all 14, donated them to the local library. And there was nothing I didn't know. It was just called, Jenny, get your act together and be disciplined.
Sure. It is interesting, isn't it? Some people don't believe all those books behind me are real. And of course, the issue is then they say, how many have you really read? And I said, well, I spent 20 minutes on each one very quickly and put it down and put it on the shelf. If it,
Eric, to that point, I don't know if he still belongs to NSA, but there is an author called, I want to say his name is Dan Poynter. Dan Poynter.
Dan Poynter, he was the bookman. He passed away,
Yes.
Jen. He
Oh,
passed
he
away.
did.
Yeah.
Okay. But he said that the average American does not get past page 14. He was talking about self-help books.
Yeah.
So, Damon, you might want to just cover your ears on this one. He says the average American doesn't get past page 14 or page 18, and something like 95% of self-help books never get finished. Well,
Yeah.
if they
I've
don't get
heard that.
past page 14, they're not going to. So we buy them and we get through the first couple of chapters and then we put it to one side.
Well, of course, in the UK, hardly anyone buys self-help books. It's not like America or Australia or Canada where people do buy them, which is quite extraordinary. And I think that's because people are welfare state and get looked after perhaps a little bit easier than they do in the other countries I'm mentioning. I don't know. I may be right. I may be wrong. You're laughing at me, so you don't agree?
Well, the statement was out of context. I'm not going to go there because it could become quite deep.
Okay, well, let's not do that. Let's not do that. I'd like to ask Damien, and he's on mute at the moment, whether he has the same problem as Jenny described, Damien, about doing the hoovering or making the coffee before you really get going on one of your books. And I know you have fantastic time deadlines on the books.
Couple of observations. First, on your observation about books not getting read past page 14, that's just a bad book. If your books are not getting read past page 14, you've written a bad book, and that's all there is to it. I'm a very, very
fabulous answer.
Sympathetic reader because I write, so therefore I'm very, very intolerant of bad books. And most books I pick up to read, I don't read past page 14 because they're bad. If you write a good book, it will be read all the way through in one sitting or two sittings. That's the watershed.
I will quote you, if I may, with that comment, which I think is brilliant.
And then,
does that apply to business books? Because you write historical novels. I think that's
absolutely, yeah. I mean, look, if you're a good author, you should be able to write about anything and make it absolutely gripping and brilliant. I mean, I really do believe that. I've written about lots of different subjects, and I can honestly say I've never had an email. This is me. This is not me. I'm just being honest. I've never had an email from anyone or a comment from anyone saying gave up and put it down, because if that happens, then you're not doing your job properly. And then the other thing about procrastination, and no, my problem's the reverse. My problem's exactly what Jennifer's been talking about. It's spending so long writing and there's no time to manage the business. Chained to the desk, tapping the keyboards, and so therefore never actually, going through that massive inbox of business stuff that needs doing. That's the real problem.
Yeah. Do you have a virtual assistant, or do you outsource some of your?
Not really, no. It's very hard to in when you're in my line of work, because creativity, the kind of stuff we do, is so intangible. I mean, my wife and I work on the business together, rather like you were describing earlier, although she's much more hands-on. She's kind of a co-creator, but no, it's really just us. So yeah.
Yeah, I do a whole day program. I've done it for years because I was married to Edmund for 18 years. And then I got married again to another dentist who was sitting in my audience in Honolulu. And with both of them, David sold his practice and came and ran my speaking business. So for about 1828, for about 29 years of my life, I've worked with two spouses. And I do a whole program on the do's and don'ts of working with one spouse. And
Fantastic.
you know exactly what I mean.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Jenny, and you asked me not to talk about dentists, and you've been married to two of them, but that's I couldn't help teasing you about that.
You think I would have learned after the first one, but no.
Right, well, I'll clock that one away. Jenny, we're almost coming to the end of our time on the recording. One last tip for people watching this live, watching this on YouTube, or listening to this on Spotify for 2014. 2024, I got that wrong, didn't I? I lost 10 years. 2024.
Well, it's not an original thought, but there's a lot of buzz around, be passionate about what you do. And I hope there's no meeting planner hearing this, but I love what I do so much in both fields. I would sort of do it for free. So to me, it's not work. And people ask me, when are you going to retire? Because I've been doing this for a long time. I said, when my brain stops working. And at the moment, my brain is sharper and more focused now than it has ever been in my entire life. So a friend of mine sent me an email one day, a couple of years ago. He said, "You're like fine wine. You're like fine wine. You get better with age," or something. It was just a really sweet thing. So no, I will go down in the trenches.
Jenny, that's been absolutely fantastic. Thanks for joining us on Monday Night Live. Can I ask members of Monday Night Live to thank Jenny in the usual way, and perhaps we'll get you back on the show, Jenny, in a year's time, and see if you've married another dentist. Am I allowed to say that? I don't know, but I've said it anyway. So absolutely fantastic. Will you stay on and answer a few questions in the chat box? And
I would love to. And Derek, thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure. And for once we got out of dentistry, for some really, really good questions.
Well, next time we won't talk about dentistry. We'll find something else to talk about. Jenny de St. George, thanks for joining me. And thanks for joining Monday Night Live.